These two mind-blowing amigurumi hacks are going to change the way that you crochet toys for the better. I've been making amigurumi for several years now, and until recently, I thought I knew most of the tips and tricks for crocheting toys. That is until I designed the 3 not-so-little pigs from the 2023 Amigurumi Festival hosted by Sewing Box magazine. While designing these 3 adorable piggies, I discovered 2 mind-blowing hacks that I will never forget and is going to change the way I make amigurumi from here on forward. But first, I want to introduce you to the Amigurumi Festival and all the adorable characters. This year's festival is the Amigurumi Kingdom, and when I say that these are the cutest patterns you've ever seen, I'm telling you, they are so adorable. And I don't want you to miss out because this bundle is only going to be available from July 5th through the 23rd, 2023. Once that date passes, you won't be able to get the patterns all together. And these toys were designed by some of the top amigurumi designers like Amore Faux Crochet, Irene Strange, Lemon Yarn, Lex in Stitches, Lulu Loves the Moon, and Spin a Yarn Crochet. And that's just some of the designers that have contributed patterns to the Amigurumi Festival. And I feel incredibly honored to even be a part of it. And what I love most about this year's festival is that it comes with a fairy tale with all of the amigurumi characters featured in it. And my 3 not-so-little pigs are included in the bundle, and I think that they just turned out so cute. But it includes 29 other patterns. You get the Milkmaid, Julia the Fairy, Thumbelina, Kappa, the Goose Who Laid Golden Eggs, Comodoro the Alux, Little Earth Elf, Darius the Dragon, Iris the Unicorn, Goldie the Wishing Fish, Snowman Yeti, Odette the Swan Princess, the Big Bad Wolf, Chubby Cyclops, Will-o'-the-Wisp, Amanita the Mushroom Girl, Lila the Talking Flower, Saku the Bigfoot, Froggy Prince, the Fox and the Crow, Pinocchio, Little Red Riding Hood, Humpty Dumpty, Evel the Mermaid. And the other amazing thing, I know I keep saying that it's also amazing, but I'm just so excited about it, but that all of the patterns are going to be available in English and Spanish. So make sure to check those dates if you're interested in getting the whole bundle. The last date to get it is July 23rd, 2023. When I designed the 3 not-so-little pigs, I had to make 3 of them, obviously. And I thought that it was going to be a fun way to test 3 different yarns against each other because I am obsessed with testing different yarns and seeing how they compare to one another. But I had no idea how much that little decision was going to change the way I make amigurumi going forward. The first little piggy is Heathcliff, and I decided that I wanted to try 100% cotton yarn for making him. Now, I've talked about it many times on my channel why I don't use cotton yarn, and here's the Cliff Notes version. It's a less stretchy fiber, and some of us are sensitive to that in our joints and our tendons and our muscles. And that lack of stretchiness actually contributed to tendonitis that I got in my elbows, so I stopped using it for several years. But my elbows were feeling pretty good, and I decided that I wanted to test it with this little pig pattern. But I did change one thing, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But the yarn that I used for this was Cotton Sprout by Premier Yarns. I used the colors Blush, Bark, White, Beige, and Hunter Green. I also used a 3mm crochet hook. And this is such a gorgeous worsted weight yarn, and the colors are they're my favorite. And as I was designing this pattern, I documented everything about it, and I discovered that this little guy was 12 inches tall, which is going to be significant here in just a minute. For my second little piggy Hamilton, I decided to use a super budget-friendly yarn, and I chose Premier Basics Worsted. I chose the colors Ballet, Butterscotch, Aran, Taupe, and Juniper. And I continued to use the exact same crochet hook, which was a 3mm. And as soon as I began crocheting, I noticed the size difference. And I checked multiple times to make sure I was using a worsted weight yarn and that I had the exact same crochet hook. And to my surprise, I was. And when I measured him completely done, he was 15 inches tall. For my third pig, Horatio, I used one of my tried and true yarns, Barocco Vintage. This is one of my hands down favorite worsted weight yarns, and I used the colors fondant, butternut, mochi, oats, and mistletoe. It's a wool acrylic blend and it feels like butter in your hands. It is so nice. But I was really curious to see how he would turn out compared to the other two. And I was completely shocked when little Horatio ended up only being 11 inches tall. That little experiment taught me so much about amigurumi, and I will never forget this lesson. I've always known there were slight differences in the thickness of each yarn, even if they are all the same weight. And each one of these yarns is labeled worsted weight. The recommended crochet hook size for the cotton sprout is 5 millimeters. For the Premier Basics worsted, it's 5.5 millimeters. And finally, for the Baroque Vintage, it's 4.5 to 5.5 millimeters. And that information led me to assume that my little pigs were all going to turn out approximately the same size, give or take. I knew they'd be a little bit different, but I didn't think they would be this different. And in general, looking at those recommended crochet hook sizes, I knew that the Baroque Vintage was going to create a slightly smaller toy and that the Premier Basics would create a slightly larger toy. But looking at the gauge gave me some slightly different information, which left me a little bit confused. The Cotton Sprouts gauge is 13 single crochet by 17 rows equals 4 inches using a 5 millimeter hook. For the Premier Basics, it's a 14 single crochet and 16 rows equals 4 inches using a 5.5 millimeter hook. And with the Baroque Vintage, it's 18 single crochet and 24 rows equals 4 inches using a 5 millimeter hook. The more stitches and rows there are in a 4-inch gauge swatch just means that the yarn is thinner, which would result in a smaller toy. And in contrast, the lower number of stitches and rows will result in a larger toy. And based on that gauge information, I wasn't surprised that the Baroque Vintage toy turned out as small as it did. But it does get trickier when you're comparing the Cotton Sprout and the Premier Basics because of the difference in the crochet hook sizes. Another way that I could have tried to figure out how large or small each one of these pigs would turn out would have been to do the wraps per inch test, which I didn't do. And there are two ways to figure out the wraps per inch of your yarn. The first and easiest way is just to look it up on Ravelry. When you search for a specific yarn on Ravelry, you will notice a little chart and it's going to show you what the weight is. And right next to the weight, it's going to give you a number and WPI, which stands for wraps per inch. And the second way is to get a ruler and wrap the yarn around 1 inch and then count how many wraps you have in that inch. The more wraps per inch, the thinner the yarn is. The fewer wraps per inch, the thicker the yarn is. According to Ravelry, the wraps per inch for each one of the yarns is 8 wraps per inch for the Cotton Sprout, 8 wraps per inch for the Premier Basics, and 9 wraps per inch for the Baroque Vintage. Again, that information just helps to confirm that the Baroque Vintage pig was going to be smaller than the other two. But the fact that the Cotton Sprout and the Premier Basics both had a wraps per inch of 8 kind of blows my mind. Even with all of that information, the best way that I could have discovered the differences between each one of these yarns would have been to do an amigurumi test ball. I created this little test to be able to compare different yarns to each other specifically for amigurumi, and I will leave a link in the description box below for that video so you can learn how to make your own little test balls. They are super simple, but it gives you a lot of information. By making these small little balls, you will be able to determine how the yarn works up, how it feels in your hand, how it looks stuffed, and you'll also be able to compare it to the other ones to see which one is bigger or smaller. That information could have helped me to know that the Premier Basics was going to create a much bigger toy than the Cotton Sprout or the Baroque Vintage. And this second amigurumi hack has to do with this little guy that I made with 100% cotton yarn. I made him first and I changed one little thing, and that is going to change the way I make amigurumi from here on forward. In the past, I've always used worsted weight yarn and a 3.5 millimeter crochet hook for crocheting toys. But I decided because I was going to be using 100% cotton, which I hadn't used in a long time, and I didn't want it to aggravate any of my tendons or joints, I decided that I needed to loosen my tension. But I didn't want to sacrifice the look of the toy. I didn't want it to have a lot of holes in the fabric, so I decided that I was going to go down in crochet hook size. I was absolutely amazed with how it turned out. I didn't have to pull, I didn't have to have really tight tension because that smaller hook did the work for me. I learned two incredible incredibly valuable lessons from designing the 3 not-so-little pigs. First, when making amigurumi, and especially if they have clothing that is going to come on and off, use the same yarn for the entire project. If I had mixed and matched these yarns, I would have either ended up with overalls that were too large or too small for each one of the pigs. Even if I had looked up the WPI and the gauge for each one of these toys, it wouldn't have given me the information that I needed. And the only real way to check to see how the different yarns are going to work up is to make an amigurumi test ball. When it comes to amigurumi, tension is so important. But I learned that there was more than one way to achieve the tension that I wanted so that I wouldn't have any holes in my toy. In the past, I just pulled the yarn to make a nice, neat stitch. Now I know that I can just use a smaller hook size and I can achieve the look that I want without hurting my wrists, my hands, or my elbows. I may not go back to using 100% cotton all of the time for my toys, but I do believe that changing this one little thing is going to help me be able to continue crocheting amigurumi for many years to come. I hope you enjoyed today's video and that you enjoyed meeting little Heathcliff, Hamilton, and Horatio. And don't forget that the Amigurumi Festival is going on between July 5th and the 23rd of 2023. But I hope you all stay safe out there and happy stitching.